My presentation is, what's my presentation title again? Okay. The DNA of a 21st century educator. What I mean by DNA here is basically the makeup of a 21st century educator. What I think, it's very personal view, that's why I put A, I didn't put the, okay? And I'm talking about, I can't find the right term, but it's a combination. It's an umbrella for skills, your attitude, your passion, your heart, your knowledge, your habits and behavior. All that put together. What do we expect from a 21st century educator? And most of you should know now, by now, there is a collaboration going on between Harvard and MIT. How many of you know about a collaboration going on between Harvard and MIT regarding open education? Okay. And what does that mean to us? Okay, that means a lot, because if the public can have access to the best educators in the world, and they come to our class, we should at least be pretty good. And that's why it's important in this presentation. I want to share with some of the things that I think a 21st century should have its DNA. So basically today I'm going to cover what do some of the people say about what is a 21st century educator, and then I'm going to focus on what is learning, how can we improve learning. And then I'm going to look in terms of designing learning, empowering learning, assessing learning, reflecting learning, and finally, transforming learning. Okay? Okay, so what is a 21st century educator? I've done some literature review, but not very in-depth. But you can see here, this here is basically what has been said about the 21st century educator, the DNA, the ingredients, okay? If you want to develop this graphic, the link is there. I'll share later. Okay. So this is Howard Gardner. He talks about the 5 minds for the future. He's not necessarily talking about educators in general. These are the minds that we should work towards. Okay. So has anyone of you read this book before? 5 Minds for the Future. Okay. Everybody knows multiple intelligences. Okay. But he also has written a book, 5 Minds for the Future. Okay. And you can see the notes. There's some links here. But what is going to be really challenging to me is the synthesizing mind. Okay. Because of the increased information overload throughout, I mean, when you go on the internet, even if you're looking for OER, it's just information overload. So you have to develop that skill, how to filter, how to organize and capture what you want. And that's a skill, and that needs practice. Okay? And understanding, you can see here, what it says, putting it all together in ways that make sense to yourself, and more importantly as a teacher, to others. Okay? And then it's very important to be creative. Okay, I think that one is okay. Be respectful. We live in a global world. You need to be more respectful of your different races and cultures and so on. And this is going to be the key for you and for your students. You need to have a disciplined mind. Basically, as globalization comes along, it's very important that, especially students grow up, having expertise. At least one thing they become slowly an expert in. Because if you have no expertise, it's going to be very tough for you when you start looking for jobs and so on. Of course, students don't develop this straight away, but it's a process. It takes, according to him, it takes about 10 years to develop a speciality. But it's very important to guide students and even teachers to be very good at least at one thing. Okay? And then we talk about ethical and respect. But this is a very good resource to read and understand. And it's actually by Howard Gardner, which many of us follow, is multiple intelligence. Okay? And then we have this lady. She actually wrote an article. So if you want to read very short, 1 page, she talked about the 21st century educator. And she mentioned 5 characteristics. Basically, that is to anticipate the future, be a lifelong learner, foster peer relations. You're good at connecting with your students. Okay? And that is something that is more important now than just giving a lecture. Okay? Because when you create a relationship, they want to listen to you and they want to be inspired by you and so on. And then also can teach and access all levels of learners. Okay? Which is not so easy now. This is the challenge we're talking about today, is able to discern effective and non-effective technology. The problem when you embrace e-learning and all these technologies, you have thousands of technologies. And which one should I use? Which one I should use for which kind of teaching format is a nightmare. And that is where universities will have their teams to help you. So if your team, if the university is no good at helping you, then you are going to struggle more. So it's very important to have specialists in the university of these technical people that understands pedagogy and can link the different tools and different kind of formats. For example, I want to do individual assignment. What is the best tool to encourage students to do individual assignment, group assignment, and so on, which I will talk about tomorrow. Okay, this guy talks about the 8 habits of highly effective educators. Okay, adapter, communicator, learner, visionary, role model, collaborator, and it goes on. These resources deserve actually a 1-hour lecture each. just sharing with this lot. But this is very important. I found this with one of the most, these I admire most, Vicky Davis. She basically says here, you believe, you receive. Okay? In experiment after experiment, it has been demonstrated that when teachers expect the students to perform well, the students work hard and live up to the teacher's expectations. And that's why when I meet lecturers, they say, oh, my students are useless. Already there's a sign that your students, if they are useless, they're definitely going to be useless with your attitude like that. As a teacher, we should always be positive. No matter what, we try to push them and engage them and so on. And she has come up with 12, I recommend you go to this, it's actually a slideshow presentation, 12 habits of the top 21st century teachers. Okay? I just wanted to share with you briefly. This is another resource to explore. Okay? But what is important here is that you believe in your student, you believe in the school, and you believe in the situation. I'm not saying you embrace it, but you try your best, and you have that energy. Because if you don't have the energy, I doubt your students will have the energy to also be engaged in the learning process. Okay, so you have 12 habits. This is also another 1-hour presentation. Okay. And then the network teaching, which I'll talk about. How many of you blog about your teaching and learning experiences? Anyone here? I'm sure there's some here. Oh, we got some. The hands are like halfway up, not all the way up. Okay, but I think these are part of the things that in the future, you benefit a lot. A lot of people say it's a waste of time blogging about your teaching. And first of all, the fact when you start writing about your own teaching and learning, you're already learning. You're thinking back. And secondly, if people start reading your stuff and giving you comments, you're actually getting feedback. Okay? So that process itself is learning. And this is another example. And how many of you know this guy? Stephen Downes. He came up with the 23 roles of an educator. If I could talk them out, it took me another 10 minutes. But this is another article I recommend you can read. What are the roles of an educator? Including a salesman, a programmer, and so on. It doesn't mean you have all, but you should have some of them. And this one I made so small, you can't even read it. Okay, I'm not asking you to read it, this presentation. And this also wrote about 33 digital skills every 21st century should have. Very small. I don't want you to read, I don't want you to memorize. But if you have a chance to check out this resource, it provides additional resources to learn every skill they recommend. Let's just try one here. I can't even read here. Okay. The first one is create and edit digital audio. Okay. Create screen capture videos and tutorials. How many of you have ever done any screen capturing? Recording of your screen. Okay. That's another way. There's a lot of tools now you can do that, especially with the iPad. It's wonderful. Okay. So it's overload. When you talk about 21st century, it's an overload. I'll try to make sense in terms of the 7 items I mentioned: learning, designing, assessing, and so on. Okay. So the first, learning. Okay. I'm going to share with you something. How many of you heard about John Medina? He wrote a book called The 12 Rules on How the Brain Learns. Okay. And he's a brain scientist. So when he talks, it's not just out of his mouth. He actually does research and he studies the brain, the movement, and the neurons, whatever. And he came up with, so I'm going to give you 12 rules on how the brain works. Okay? The first one is exercise boosts brain power. And that's one thing I have to start doing more exercise. But actually that boosts brain power. And you can imagine when you sit in the class, even here, you're sitting here and your blood circulation is going down. It's not very conducive actually for it. He's actually criticizing 2 things. The cubicle, which all people say, I say the cubicle, and also the fact that you're sitting down and learning. You know? And if you've ever been to Curtis Bonk kind of session, he'll actually ask you to stand up and jump. Okay? But it's very important that exercise, so it's important in a way that students should be reasonably fit also. Okay? Our brain is a survival organ. When we get a challenge, we like it. Okay? Wiring. This is also important. Every brain is wired differently. Even twins. Because during the, what do you call it? Every time you have an activity, when you think, there's actually something happening in your brain and it's continuously being rewired. Okay? Attention. Okay, this is important. The brain does not, what do you call it? It says, pay attention to boring stuff. So that means that as an educator, what does that mean? That you should try not to be boring. Okay? But when I actually shared that information, there was one lecturer that told me, you know, my job is not to entertain. So my reply to him was a bit kind of crude, but I just said, your job is also not, you're not paid to be boring either. You have to find a balance. Okay? So that's how the brain works. Short-term memory. Okay? Repeat to remember. And this is one of the problems when we design curriculum. We want to cover 21 chapters. So there's no repetition, no practice. We just swim through all the 21 chapters and expect the students to learn. It's quite sad. Another one is remember to repeat. So not only should you repeat, you should remember to repeat, so you repeat continuously. It's how the brain works. Sleep well, think well. Stress. The stressed brain don't learn the same way. And if you actually read the book, you will discover that if your brain is toxic stress, and that's most students go through what you call, SPM is going nuts now, but in university also you go crazy before the exams and so on. And actually, they show that on many cases the brain shrinks. So if you're under a long period of stress, your brain shrinks. So can you imagine if the student is stressed for 4 years? You stimulate more than one sense, okay? Vision trumps more. So visualize your learning. He says vision, our brain is very receptive to vision. I'm not going to go into here, but male and female brains are... I have a video about that, not today, okay? And exploration, we are powerful natural explorers. Our brain is like that. If I tell you to do something, your brain straight will refuse, don't want to do it. But if I ask you a question gently and encourage, and then you want to inquire. And that's the approach also in teaching also. You want them to explore, inquire. So if you tell them everything, there's no exploration. You know? So that's part of how the brain works also. So this is actually 12 rules or crash course how the brain learns. Let me just check my time. Okay, I got another 40 minutes. That's good. Okay. So I'm not going to cover this, but we have to ask ourselves these questions when we teach. Or as a university, as a program, how do we nurture global graduates? How do we deal with the Y and Z generation? You know, the attention span is -2 seconds. When you come to class already, they're Facebooking, tweeting, and it's not there. So how do you deal with that? You know, how do you deal with that? I don't have all the questions today, but these are questions that you should ask when you develop your courses and programs. How do you prepare students for the innovation economy? Okay, there's been a lot of discussion about knowledge economy, information. But actually now we're moving towards the innovation economy. Look at the companies that are dominating the market now, like Apple. These are all innovation companies. So how do we install that in our students that they are creative and innovative? And this is a typical one. How do you prepare students for jobs not yet invented? Okay? And then how do you deal with the language barrier? We are, in a sense that if you teach in English in Malaysia, if that's your second language, you're already handicapped. I used to teach critical thinking last time at UNITA, and I struggle with the students because I know they can think very well. But when they speak it out in English, it just doesn't come up, for the weakest students. So it's very sad when I have to go through the exams, and I know these students can so much more, but the language is not there. So language is so critical, even in expression. And also when you become a boss one day, or you become an entrepreneur, when you have an idea, if you don't have language ability, you might lose the contract, you might lose the potential because your language skills are not there. And that's why it's very important to have a good program dealing with language, okay? And this is also the 21st century skills required for the workplace. And this is actually, I found quite a few programs, but this roadmap here is actually for schools, but universities can easily learn from it. Have you seen this one before? Route 21? Okay, it's a very comprehensive details of what is the kind of skills that are required and some activities on. And especially the learning and innovation skills, they focus on master skill of critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, innovation, communication, and collaboration. These are critical skills besides the technology skills and life, career skills, and so on. Okay. So now we're going more into tech stuff, okay? Now, what is important as we have all these tools and technology, I think now we've come to the stage that most educators see that technology can play an important role in education. I think I started 10 years ago, and I would sit with the lecturers, and the lecturer was like, no way, I'm not using any technology. And I can understand, because 10 years ago, the technology was not user-friendly at all. But today, I mean, my daughter can learn using iPad with any guide, anything. You know, even my daughter that's 2 years old can figure out how to switch on a YouTube video, find YouTube videos, which is it's not good, but I'm just saying that at that age, the technology becomes so user-friendly. So it's very important as an educator for learning purposes to develop your own. Everyone has a personal learning environment, but the question is, how much are you using technology to learn? There's so much out there. There's so much fantastic things. What kind of tools are you using? Do you have a person learning network? You know, when I talk about networks, actually linking up to people. And you'll be surprised. If you have a problem in something, you just send an email to a professor in Princeton, Harvard. You'll be surprised. They might even reply and actually create a connection, and you get feedback on things that maybe take you 5 years to do research on because you're not an expert in the field. So don't be scared to actually send out emails to all these top professors, okay? And start building your network, okay? So this is done by Jane Hart, okay? Improving productivity, okay? So I'm supposed to engage you. So what tools at the moment are you using? How many of you using, when you take notes, how do you take notes? Anyone take it digitally here? I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just asking. Anyone using any tools here? Okay. Anyone using Evernote? Prof. Karim? Oh, the Evernote. One is the Evernote. These are some of the tools you can use for technology. Finding content. How do you find content? How many of you actually use the e-library to find your resources? Do you have hands here? Okay. I'm sure you spend about 500,000, 1 million, 2 million. How many of you use Google? But you know, to me, I've asked that question so many times, and the reason probably is because when you go to Google, it searches everything. It doesn't give a fine research, but it's easy to find when you know what you want for. But it's very important to also link up with the e-library. Okay. YouTube also, actually YouTube is I think the second most used search engine. Okay. How many of you do social bookmarking, for example, to manage your resources? You know, like favorites. Okay, everybody use favorites here, right? Favorites. How many put your favorites online using tools like Delicious, Digo, what's the other one? Scoopy. There's a Scoopy man. Okay, the beauty of this, when you do this, when you want to share resources with your students, it's already online, you just give them the link. Instead of you have to compile it, copy paste it into documents and PowerPoints and so on. So these are ways you can use technology to find content and also to keep yourself updated. How many of you use a Google Reader or a reader, RSS reader? We've got one there, good. So at least, you know, it's starting up. These are some of the tools to keep yourself updated. The benefit of using such tools, I will discuss tomorrow also, so I don't spend much time on that. Okay. Sharing resources. How many of you share your stuff on Facebook? Teaching and learning stuff. Of course you say, I mean, everybody here, I think it's about more than 50% of Malaysians are on Facebook. So that should be at least 70% here. But how many of you use Facebook for teaching and learning? Anyone? Oh, it's good. It's good. At least we have a few. Okay. And SlideShare, for example. How many of you use SlideShare to share your slides? Okay. The beauty of SlideShare is it's the largest community in the world that where people actually share their slides. Now they can do PDFs and even videos. And the beauty, when you start sharing it there, you might be surprised. You get feedback. You get, you build connections, and it's a very powerful learning tool. Okay. And there's so many other tools. Wikis. Okay. Let's try again. How many of you actually use a wiki? One for the same. They rotate that. But wiki is also a very powerful tool. If you want to do group assignments, every time people ask me, I want to do group assignments with my students. What should I use? Use a wiki. But they say, I don't know how to use technology. I say, forget about it. You don't need to know how to use technology. You tell your students. You give them the tools. Say, you have to do a group assignment. Give me one link. That's your group assignment. That's it. So, I mean, the ways of doing it, you don't have to know technology to get your students to use it. Okay? And this is my favorite tool, but somehow I cannot get lecturers to use because maybe it's very messy. How many of you actually use Twitter? Okay, how many of you tweet? Yeah, I know that tool is very messy, but it's a very powerful tool because that's the tool that I've used most to connect with educators around the world. Okay, so that's a very powerful tool. Okay, so these are some of the technologies we can use to be more productive, and they're open. We're talking about open; they're open. Most of them are free. Okay, so what I'm saying, 21st century educators, they use technology to connect to all the people, connect to the students, connect to all the teachers. They use it to interact with them. It's a very powerful interaction tool. Of course, maybe in the beginning you'll struggle a bit, but when you start figuring out. I've had so many lectures. In 2010, I said, use Facebook. Everyone said, no, I want my private life. I don't want to share. I don't want my students to find out my picture of me doing some silly things. And the student says the same thing. But today, I'm not saying many lecturers now use it, but those that have actually used it, they're praising me. They say, I don't want to use the LMS anymore. So I'm just saying that, try it out. Give it a try, okay? One class, or try it out from your colleagues and create a community. Collaborate. These tools, many of these tools are very powerful for collaboration. And of course, creating content. I'll get back to creating content. That's actually tomorrow about OER, we'll be talking a lot about creating content. And then sharing. Teaching is such a noble profession, and you spend all the time preparing your notes only for your class. Think what you can actually share it with other people, and many more can benefit from your content. And of course, learning.